So, the White Lotus Season 3, Episode 7 dropped on Sunday, and I was finally hoping that we'd get some drama. You might have already watched my previous video, where we did a combined analysis of all the episodes so far, and wait for it, we were right. Most of our predictions actually came true, including the Amor Fati title of the finale, the robbers being Valentine's friends, the whole Christianity versus Buddhism thing, Piper's initial discomfort, and Jaclyn's narcissism. And here's the kicker. Did the episode actually live up to the hype of a penultimate episode? 'Cause by now we were expecting something big, right? Something that would keep us on our toes before the finale. Something that, I don't know, just makes us crave that next episode. And I think it kind of failed on that point. Don't get me wrong, I love doing psychological analyses of these characters, I live for it. But this season feels more like one that should have, 20 episodes? And we're only at episode 7. I mean, Timothy Ratliff did not go unhinged. He's more lost and helpless, which actually makes me want to empathize with him. Rick, after all that hype, he just pushed the guy to the ground, and he seems really satisfied with that. And not to mention, Jaclyn is not even the worst narcissist we've seen in the White Lotus universe. Like, come on, guys. I had one final hope that maybe Greg's party would give us something juicy, you know? Some psychopathic behavior, but no. He talked manipulatively, sure, but he also spoke decently to Belinda? Like, what the fuck? Where is the psychopathic Greg? Where are the extremely narcissistic rich people? Hello, Jaclyn. Where are the instinctive actions taken by someone who's truly desperate? I'm looking at you, Timothy. This is definitely not what I felt watching Season 1 or Season 2. If the White Lotus creators hadn't announced that the next one is the last, I honestly wouldn't have believed it. But, and this is a good but, I do think it kind of sets the stage. If something crazy is going to happen in the finale, like if the pace suddenly changes and everything just goes nuts in a short amount of time, then yeah, I will totally swallow my words. Do I see that happening though? No. I feel like most of the twists were kind of predictable, and honestly, there wasn't a single point where I felt completely shocked or anything. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, let's get into some real analysis. The good part about this episode is that we actually got to see a lot of people talk, especially key players who didn't really have much dialogue this season. And that's Greg, Saxon, Zion, and Mook. We also got to see a bit more of Chelsea and Rick's past, literally just one line, but we finally get why she's so attached to him. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go character by character. So, we'll begin with probably the most interesting character in this episode, Greg. In the previous episodes, Greg didn't really get as much attention as he deserved. Yeah, we saw him staring at some people, looking like he was plotting something evil in his head, and he had a couple of dialogues, very important, I must add, about why people come to Thailand. But the rest of the time, he was just super silent and kind of just observing. And in this last episode, we finally saw him talk to Belinda. This was long overdue, obviously. If you remember, it was episode 2 where Belinda first noticed Greg, and episode 3 where she went up and talked to him, and he totally denied his identity. And now it's episode 7, and we're finally seeing them address the larger-than-elephant in the room, which is Tanya and her death. So just a quick recap. Tanya and Greg met in the first season of the White Lotus in Maui, and they were already married by season 2. Tanya, died in season 2, and since she was the heiress of, a huge load of wealth, Greg became the sole inheritor. And of course, Greg had a hand in her death, which is why Belinda is, super suspicious of him from the start. Belinda knows that Greg knows that she knows, so she's trying not to freak out. But honestly, who wouldn't? He might be willing to, or maybe already has, planned a similar fate for her if he could do that to his own wife. I was fully expecting Greg to slip something into her drink or invite her to his yacht. You know, where Greg, killed Tanya. But no, they had a conversation, a calm, adult conversation, except that Greg tried to buy her out to keep his secret. So he didn't really admit to harming or killing Tanya, but he did admit to running away from the US and changing his identity, basically to avoid, legal stuff or investigations. And then he said, Tanya would have wanted me to do this for you, referring to giving Belinda the money. But Belinda's she says she needs to think about it, but honestly, that's basically a no. She didn't expect him to offer money as the first thing, and I think she has really strong moral standards. So yeah, I don't think she's gonna take it. Now here's a question I have for my American viewers, especially Hawaiians. Is $100,000 actually enough to start a massage center? Because in today's economy, that seems really low. And not to mention that Zion, Belinda's son, also said something like Belinda could take a whole 1-year vacation with that money. I don't know, it just didn't add up for me. Did I miss something? Comment down below. Now, of course, we also have to talk about how Belinda and Zion seem to be in a tight financial situation. And Zion is totally willing to bend the rules if it means more comfort or safety for them. But Belinda's trying to set an example for her son by refusing the money. And at the same time, she's worried about their safety now. It's kind of a catch-22. There was a small conversation about Greg having an Oedipus complex. In psychology, Oedipus complex, in Freudian terms, at least refers to a period in psychosexual development where young boys feel attracted to their mothers and consider their father as a rival. We might have all heard about it, I am sure. If the Oedipus complex is not resolved, that is, if the father-son rivalry is not resolved, the young boy can grow up without proper self-regulating mechanisms, or morality, or what we call superego. We generally see a lot of aggression, and men like that are usually vain too. It fits Greg perfectly. On the other hand, Nietzsche's reading of Oedipus Rex talked about Amor Fati, or the fate of love. We briefly talked on this in the last video. Oedipus, the Greek king, tried to avoid his fate when he was told that he would kill his father and marry his mother, but it led him to his destiny anyway. So Amor Fati is a complex phenomenon. It's about accepting and embracing your destiny and fate, irrespective of whether it is sad, happy, good, bad. In the end, our response to these external circumstances is what matters more than the circumstances themselves. In the White Lotus finale, since it is titled Amor Fati, I would expect to see a roll of fate. All the buildup that we have seen until now, the arc that each character has gone through, will result in their final destiny. Next up, we've got the Ratliff family. So we saw a totally different side to Saxon this episode, and to be honest, it kind of threw me off. He's being nice now? Up until this point, he was shown as this goofy, trying to emulate his father kind of character. And this episode, he finally came into his own. We saw him stand up to Timothy, and he also spoke to Chelsea openly and directly, not in that gross, creepy way he used to. And yeah, he said he's willing to learn spirituality if it means that much more to her. But then at the end, he started getting touchy. At which point, Chelsea was just like, bye, and threw him out. But I really want to talk about his conversation with his dad for a sec. When Saxon told Timothy that his entire future is tied to his father's decisions, and so he should be kept in the loop if something major is going on. You could see the fear, the real anxiety in his eyes. His future might be over before it even starts. And you could see that Timothy sees it too. He realizes what a big mistake he's made. And when you combine that with his convo with Victoria, where she said that she wouldn't want to live without the material comforts that she is used to, his wife and son have both now told him, basically, that they have nothing to live for if the business goes under. And that, weight, that crushing pressure, you could really see it on his face. There's this pain in his eyes, and he's clearly thinking there's no way out of this but to end his own life, maybe even take his family with him. Victoria also brings up the Christianity versus Buddhism thing again. So we talked about this in the last video, how the comparison feels super deliberate, with Saxon, Timothy, and Victoria representing Christianity, and Piper and Lochlan representing Buddhism. In this episode, Victoria says, in her very North Carolina drawl, by the way, something like, maybe Jesus can save her from those Buddhists. Doesn't Willie though? We also get this small segment from the monastery where Piper and Lochlan are staying, and they both look so culture shocked. I honestly don't think they've ever been this far out of their comfort zones. Again, as we discussed in the last video, Piper's whole journey seems to be about unlearning. She's shedding her old skin, trying to learn new ways of being. The real question is, will she actually be willing to do that? And will she be able to? And here's another thought I had. Maybe she thought going to a monastery would just instantly fix her. That it would, ease the pain or confusion or whatever she's been feeling. But now she's realizing that peace comes from within. You don't have to go to Thailand or India and become a monk to find peace. You could meditate in your bedroom in America, right? The important part is the ritual, the inner work. So yeah, she might be having doubts now that the time has actually come to commit. Lochlan's also there with Piper at the monastery, and honestly, he's such a fascinating character. He talks about light and dark, and how he doesn't want to give in to the dark side of himself, and he genuinely wants to improve, but at the same time, he's just incapable of making a decision on his own. Ever since episode 1, he's been looking for guidance, watching his mom, his dad, Saxon, Piper, constantly checking to see what they think before deciding what he thinks. And I think he even mentioned that there are a lot of big personalities in his family, so he ended up being the quiet one. Makes sense, but I think there's something more going on. I have this strong feeling that Lochlan might feel more at home with gender-neutral roles or expectations, rather than these traditional masculine ones he's being pushed into. He's super sensitive, but also doesn't seem to know when boundaries are being crossed, which is kind of wild considering he's college-aged. Usually, you only see that kind of thing in really pampered kids, but I didn't get the vibe that he's been pampered more than the others, and his need to latch on to someone, it's kind of suffocating, to be honest. I wonder whether something in his past made him that way. I would love to get to know that, but there's only one more episode left, and I doubt we'll get much background at this point. We also saw Rick, who finally had a face-to-face conversation with Jim Hollinger, the guy who supposedly murdered his father. And I gotta say, we all expected some action scenes, or maybe a beautiful escape sequence shot in Bangkok. But nope, we got none of that. I mean, I'm glad he chose not to use violence. That's growth. But I still have this gut feeling that this is not the last we've seen of Jim Hollinger. There's actually a theory floating around in the fandom that Jim is actually Rick's father, and I totally support that theory, especially because Jim seems to know the mother's name, but was in too much shock to respond properly. So now I'm wondering, are we gonna get this big, oh my god revelation in the finale, where Rick finds out that Jim is actually his real dad all along? And I mean, the White Lotus isn't really known for happy endings, right? So I'm a little suspicious now that everything seems to be going too well for Rick and Chelsea. Something might happen to him. There was this one moment in the episode when Rick and Frank go out to enjoy the night in Bangkok, and the camera just lingers on Rick's face, and we see him smile, actually smile, for the first time. And it instantly took me back to that therapy session he had, where he was asked if he could remember a stress-free moment in his life, and we got that backstory about his family. That smile in this episode, it felt closure. He was finally happy, finally stress-free. He's finally let go. Now let's talk about Mook and Gaitok. So Mook actually had kind of a big role in this episode. And okay, I admit it. In the last video, I said I was kind of suspicious of Mook, but I take it back. I take it all back. That one's on me. I went in with a presumption, and turns out she's just a really nice girl who wants Gaitok to be a little more ambitious. And honestly, I totally get that mindset. If you grow up in a small town, you dream of getting out of it. You want a partner who's driven, who wants to build a bigger life in a bigger city with more opportunities. But I can totally empathize with Gaitok too. Some people are so deep in their comfort zones that anything outside of it just triggers anxiety, so they don't push themselves. Usually people with contrasting personalities like Mook and Gaitok don't really work out. But in this case, I think she might actually be the one to pull him out of his shell. And it seems Gaitok's willing to change, but also, it's not Mook's job to fix him, right? So in the finale, I'm really expecting a makeover moment for Gaitok's character. Maybe he gets that killer instinct if Mook's life is in danger. I just hope he's not literally the killer though, right? Also, this was a big moment. Gaitok finally realizes, along with us, that it's actually Valentine's friends who stole from the resort. So now the big question is, will he take Mook's advice and stand up for himself and for others, or will he just let it slide? I feel like he's gonna stand up. He seems like that kind of guy. You know, the don't underestimate me type. And who knows, maybe that confrontation is what earns him a big promotion at work, or even a whole new life. Fingers crossed. And now, last but definitely not least, the toxic friend group. Jaclyn, Laurie, and Kate. The tension between them in this episode was so good. It physically made me uncomfortable when they all sat down to dinner together. And Jaclyn? My God, what a narcissist. Michelle Monaghan is playing her so beautifully. The smirk, the condescension, fuck. By the end of the episode, I literally could not stand her. And Kate, who didn't seem to catch on before, actually joined in when Jaclyn was insulting Laurie, saying stuff about how she always ends up picking the short end of the stick, and that's why she's eternally disappointed. I mean, what? In my life, I have never talked to a friend like that, let alone someone you're supposed to be close to. If any of my friends said something like that to me, I don't know if I could forgive them either. Then Laurie goes to the Muay Thai fight and ends up sleeping with Alexei, and she realizes that he's actually one of the thieves who stole from the resort. But before she could do anything about it, she has to escape because Alexei's girlfriend shows up. I'm really interested to see what Laurie does next. I think she might spill the beans about Jaclyn's late-night session with Valentine to her husband, and maybe fake apologize or be like, you should get over it, kind of like how Jaclyn treated her earlier. If that happens, we might get a real fight between them, and I'm so here for it. Now, I was super disappointed with Kate in this episode. I know she seemed to pick up on Jaclyn's indifference toward Laurie, but she literally did nothing about it. Just like Laurie said, Kate always pretends like nothing is wrong. She is the ultimate avoider. Okay, now for the final segment of today's video, our predictions for the White Lotus Season 3 finale. So one of the big looming questions is, who might be the killer, and whose body do we see floating in the lake? I've got my final predictions, and I think I'm right. Don't we all? I think it's Rick. Unfortunately for Chelsea, it seems most likely that Rick gets killed. Probably in some sort of showdown with the big Bangkok goons. This would mean two things. First, Rick's death has been foreshadowed multiple times by the writers. Chelsea said bad things happen in threes. Second, remember that moment when Chloe gives Chelsea that little premonition? She says that girls who care end up heartbroken or worse. And when Chelsea asks, what's worse? We never get the answer. That could totally be another hint that Rick's time is up. And if that's the case, I think Jim Hollinger's bodyguards will be involved in the shooting. So, a gun showdown between Hollinger's men, the resort security guards like Gaitok, and maybe even Valentine's friends. This could leave some people wounded, or worse, dead. And maybe, just maybe, that's what leads to a job opening on Sritala's security team. Gaitok gets promoted for being a hero. He gets the girl, and he finally steps into his power. I know it's a long shot, but that's how I see it going down. As for the rat lifts, I'm convinced something's going to happen with that poisonous fruit. We know it can kill someone. And I think Tim might try to eat it or drink it, but maybe he's stopped before it's too late. It's hard to say how their story will end, but I do see the potential for at least one death. The only way I see them having a happy ending, if you can call it that, is if Greg somehow helps them. But for that to happen, Timothy has to face the truth head on. Now, speaking of Greg, I can totally see him trying to get Belinda to take the bait with the money again. She might refuse, but I bet he has a plan B. What could it be? Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe the police show up at the resort and, by pure coincidence, bump into Greg and take him back to the US for questioning? Could that be how things finally resolve for Belinda? We'll see. As always, if you liked this video and my analysis, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with your theories too. I'll be back next week with my analysis of the finale, and maybe even a full breakdown of the entire season. So yeah, see you guys next week. Ciao.